for your coffee. I was wondering why I could smell that. It's because it's all over the floor. No, I feel bad for you. You didn't get to enjoy it. So I'll talk very, very briefly about this, but today's the last, yes, thanks. Today's the last day for resignation. This is the resignation deadline. I think you have till midnight tonight. So I just want to talk very briefly about it. The reason I don't want to talk about it too much is because most of the people for whom this applies are the empty seats. They're the ones really going through a dilemma. They're sitting somewhere outside of lecture, deciding whether they should resign or not. There's a strong correlation between those of you who show up to every lecture and students who pass the class. It shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, but skipping class is a pretty easy way to fail. That said, there's probably a few of you who are on the fence and trying to figure out whether or not to resign, so I want to talk about it a little bit still. Is a resignation, if you're not aware, this is probably your first or second semester in college. Resignation, if you resign from a class, you get an R on your transcript. If you know you're going to fail the class, it's often better to take the R than the F because an R does not factor into your GPA calculation. So the F, it's a 0.0. GPA is going to factor in. It's going to take a big hit to that number, but an R doesn't. It's like you never took the class effectively. But the warning of this is... And by the way, we have it so late in the semester, the university has it so late in the semester, it has a pretty big safety net for you, so you can preserve your GPA. The caution of this is it can affect your financial aid. I don't know all the financial aid rules or anything, but I believe if you drop below full time, so if you're taking 12 credits and you resign a class, it's going to drop you below full time, and it can affect your financial aid because it's like you didn't take the class. It'll still show up on your transcript as an R, but for all other purposes, it's like you never took the class. So keep that in mind. Might be too late to talk to an advisor about all the implications, but just know the consequences if you do take that option, if you are on the fence about that. And maybe it's for other classes, even if it's not 116. Just that's what resignations are. Can be a powerful tool. I've resigned classes when I was a student, by the way. I got to that point where I'm just like, screw this class, and I'm out, and I'd resign from it. But I was always taking enough credits that wouldn't drop me below full time. All right, that's all I want to talk about with that, unless anybody has questions. So anybody have questions before I dropped out of Harvard to create Facebook, and then changed my name, came back to college as a professor? That's me. Any other questions before we get into it? Today's another live coding lecture. Polymorphism examples. Another live coding lecture where I'm going to take all the code from Inheritance Week and apply polymorphism to it. That's our goal today. In the slides, I kind of just said, here's polymorphism, and here's what our code looks like after we apply polymorphism. So I want to go to the code and show you the step-by-step, kind of integration of polymorphism. So we're starting with what we had at the end of Inheritance Week and showing that transition of, okay, this class can be abstract, this method can be abstract, this can be an interface, and going through all of that. The code, I have this starting point. This is the code we're going to start with. I have it copied into Lecture 2, which I'll push to the repo after lecture. That's what I was doing right just now, if you were watching, is pushing the previous lecture's code to the repo. Yep.
Oh, yeah. I remember that back then you had an extra quiz on graphs. How come you removed it and everything like that?
Why did I remove the extra quiz on graphs? Would you like to take an extra quiz on graphs?
No, I'm just asking.
That's pretty much why. I'll give you a better answer, though. But that's roughly why. Last semester, we had 6 quizzes and 6 interviews, and it was absolute chaos. It was hell for students. It was hell for TAs grading. It was hell for Paul and I, who were co-teaching. We co-teach each spring semester. It was hell for everybody. It was just too much. We were having every lab, at least once we got into the swing of the semester, I'll say most labs, it was a quiz, an interview, a second chance quiz, and a second chance interview all in one lab session, and it was an absolute mess. So I was looking at the schedule during the break and saying, how can we make this less of a mess? The quiz and interviews were classes, inheritance, polymorphism, linked lists, trees, and graphs. So I took linked lists and trees. They're pretty similar, so I smashed those together. Inheritance and polymorphism are pretty similar, so I smashed those together. Kept classes as it was because it's nice to have a nice intro quiz and interview. That's just the basics of OOP. And then graphs just didn't have a home. So, but task 8 is all about graphs and running breadth first search in your code. So I still hit you with the graphs knowledge that you need. I believe we're not going to miss much from missing the quiz and interview for graphs. Plus scheduling, it gives us more time at the end of the semester. Like when we had graphs, it was the second to last week of the semester was chance 1, the last week of the semester was chance 2, and then the final exam the next week. So all 3 of your chances were back to back. It was just a big crunch at the end of the semester. So for all those reasons, no graphs. Yeah.
Are RTAs upset about the fact that you changed that to like credit in that?
Not for that one specifically. The TAs are mad whenever I soften the tasks at all. But with the quizzes and interviews, since they have to do things, they're not upset. So it's funny how that works. But yeah, every student, not even just TAs, but every single student ever. Whenever I ask, like, should I make it easier next semester? No! I suffered, they have to suffer. Because you should, especially the TAs who have been around for a long time, ask them what 116 was like when they did take it. If you're ever feeling bad about what I make you go through, ask them how it used to be. It was as recent as like 3 years ago, I want to say. Has it been that long? 116 was freaking intense. We did functional programming, concurrency. I did TCP sockets, web sockets, some web development. I think we did a little databases, expanded a little bit on the databases from 115. We did a lot of stuff, and it was just a blistering pace. I did inheritance in a day, polymorphism in a day, and then state pattern in a day, and then moved on to the next thing after that. It was wild. It was very wild. Of course, we didn't have quizzes either, or interviews, so.
Do you see like the correlation between how many people we have at the beginning of the semester now and before? Like, was there more people who resigned from classes?
Yeah, but not as big of an effect as I had hoped, which is really kind of perplexing and sad. How different the course is. I expected a lot more students to pass. It did get a lot better. It went from like mid 40% failing to upper 30% failing. So a big difference, but I was hoping to get low 30s or high 20s. We didn't quite get there, not yet. But I don't want, I could talk about that all day. I don't want to get too sidetracked. Yeah, it can't get too easy. It can't get too much easy. So I'll talk about it a little bit more. I think there's about 20 to 25, maybe even as high as 30% of the class that no matter how easy I make the class, they're going to fail. There are students who haven't even submitted task 1 yet. Like, there's nothing I can do to get that student to pass. There's students who haven't shown up at all, haven't submitted any lecture questions. Like, there's just nothing I can do there. So I think the lowest that number can possibly go is low 20s. I don't think I can ever get lower than that. And to get from high 30s to low 20s, I think it would require compromising way too much of the course. That there wouldn't be an educational experience, educational value to get out of it anymore. Plus, I have the pressure of 220, 250. If I soften 116, and I don't think 116 has really been softened. I think it's been streamlined, is the way I like to think of it. We removed some of the very difficult topics, but then amped up the topics that remain. Like, we go further into inheritance and polymorphism. When I was doing inheritance in a day, it was like, look, extends is a keyword. Isn't that neat? You can override things. Let's move on. Now we do memory diagrams. We have interviews where we're asking you to do more things with each topic. So you're going deeper into each topic. But I have pressure from 220, 250. If I soften things too much and I don't prepare you for the next semester, you're going to get 2 Fs. And sometimes, as tough as this is, sometimes it's better to give a student an F in 116 as opposed to letting them go on and get 2 Fs next semester. And no student in the history of ever will get into 220 and 250, be in over their head and say, you know what, I got to go back and take 116 again and get that foundation before I come back to these. Nobody's ever going to do that unless they're forced to. It's kind of an unfortunate part of the whole thing. So I can't soften things up too much, or else you're going to get into this pit of despair in 220-250 and then fail like 3 semesters in a row before you change majors. If one extra semester of 116 can help a student, unfortunately, sometimes that's just what's got to happen. Because 220-250, there's still, I still have some pressure from different angles that that students get into 220-250 unprepared. That 116 doesn't go far enough, that I'm not demanding enough of everybody. So there is temptation to make the course harder. But those are decisions I have to make. Those are the tough decisions. So maybe high 30% failing is too low. But it's a lot of stuff we think about and talk about a lot behind the scenes. I don't want, unless there are other questions, I'm going to cap it at that. Yep. Did you have a question?
Well, with getting close to the end, how bad is office hours and other stuff like that going to be near December time? That's when
Horrible. Absolutely. So how bad are office hours going to be at the end of this semester? I'm usually pretty optimistic, but I think office hours are going to be horrendous at the end of the semester. I'm actually kind of really nervous. Like, office hours this semester haven't been bad at all. I don't think any office hours have been all that crowded. Usually at this point in the semester, like for the past 5 weeks, this section of the semester, the middle section, office hours would be queues of 30 students. I would get in, do the best I can, and then leave 20 students who have been sitting there for over an hour and didn't get an answer to their questions at all. That's fairly common. And the fact that that hasn't happened at all this semester, and then looking at the submissions, like I can see how far behind so many students are. There are students still working on test 2 who haven't given up yet. Maybe they'll resign today, but you can't do all that work in, we only have 3 more weeks of classes. You can't do all that much work in 3 weeks. It just hit me yesterday. I'm like, wow, we're really at the end of things. You can't do that much work if you're on test 2 or 3 unless you dedicate your life to 116 over that time. Yeah. 116. Yeah. Yeah. And I haven't looked at the numbers yet. I don't always hire at the end of fall semesters. I don't always hire at the end of fall semesters, but sometimes I do, and I'll post that on Piazza if I do. But we do hire for 115 and 116 TAs, in case anybody didn't hear it, for TAs. At the end of every spring semester, there will be an email sent out to all CSE undergrads. And when you see that email, get in your application, come in and interview, and then we'll go from there. But if you see that post on Piazza, and I'll probably announce it in lecture too, if I'm doing hiring this semester. Mm-hmm. But just, to more directly answer the question, the requirements, as long as you're in 116 and going to pass, that's the requirement. No GPA requirements, really no other requirements. One of my best TAs over the years had, I think, a 2.6 GPA. And they were just a phenomenal TA. So I don't even look at GPA with applications. I want to know, can you explain things to other students? And usually students who struggled through the material are better at explaining it because they know what worked for them. Somebody who flew through the material and didn't have to think about it at all sometimes make the worst TAs. So I don't look at GPAs to the point where even a 4.0 might be a detriment. I might say, 4.0, I don't want that person as a TA. They didn't know what the struggle's like. Yeah. Not really. I mean, if you're a 4.0 and you know how to explain things, I'm still going to hire you. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying 4.0 is great in industry, but as a TA, it's a certain set of skills that we're looking for. Yeah. For 116, I leave it pretty open-ended. That if you have enough stuff on your plate, if you're doing enough, if a TA ever dips below 7 hours a week, I start getting on, like, you need to do something. But as long as you're filling up your time, somebody who's doing a lot of grading and a lot of stuff on the back end and has 3 lab sections, I'm going to let them go without office hours. I think most TAs like to take an hour or 2 of office hours, though. Any other questions? I'm fine getting off topic because we're just doing live demos today. There's no content that I have to cover. Yeah, in the back. My number is 7. It's different per class. Every instructor sets their own things. But for me, once a TA dips below 7, I'm getting mad.
Mm-hmm. There's another question I have.
Yeah.
It's about that new class that we got like a message about. They're working like on a real project kind of thing. And I remember you were like on the list was AutoLab or like AutoLab replacement.
Yeah, do it.
And yeah, I was interested in it, but I was thinking, can we take it after 116 or do we have to like?
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. The course is forced registration only. I don't know if there are any prereqs listed. Are there no? I can just ask you, I guess. There are no listed prereqs for 302 for CSE 302. We're talking about.
I've not seen
It might just be. Yeah, it might just be emailing Alan, and if he says yeah, then.
So it's like, do you know where it was kind of how the process would go for that class?
I'm not 100% on how the process works. It's all ran by Alan, and then once the student list comes in, then I think I start getting involved. And then once we get into the project, like I'll be running the DevU project. But I'm not positive how this part of the process works. But I think it all starts with an email to Alan.
I think it's a really cool idea.
Oh, it's going to be a blast. It's going to be fun. We're going to build. So for that, if you've seen that, the DevU project, we're building currently a replacement for AutoLab with all of the features that we want, all the best features. Because AutoLab, it's great. We use it in a lot of classes, but there's just certain things that I've been using it for so long. There are certain things where it just gets in my way and doesn't let me do exactly what I want to do. So I want to build something from the ground up that's perfect. And it will be perfect. Yep.
How difficult is it going to be coding with graphs? That's like.
I'm torn on this one. So the question, how difficult is it going to be coding with graphs? So how hard is task 8 going to be? I don't think it's that hard. The way I present it in lecture, I walk you through exactly what you need to do on the homework, but I do it visually. I don't show you code. I just show you visually this. I'll have like a chart, and I'll say, this chart looks like a hash map. Maybe you want to I do all kinds of things like that during the lecture. But students tend to struggle with it. So I think it should be one of the easier homeworks, but it ends up being one of the harder ones. And I think most of that is students are just so exhausted by the time they get to task 8 that even an easy assignment would seem very hard. Either that or students can't take English sentences and turn them into code, which might be part of it too. Yep.
Did you ever release like the harder tasks from previous iterations of this class?
Maybe. I'm not really opposed to it. A lot of the assignments haven't been run since we had Scala, so they'd be in Scala. It wouldn't be super valuable. If you're interested in some, I don't know, try emailing me. I might just send them just to you if you're interested, or if anyone else is. If there's demand for it. Usually if I do release old assignments, there'll be students who ask for it, but when I release it, there'll be like 1 or 2 students who take a peek at it and nobody else looks at it at all. So I kind of stopped doing, like I used to put old assignments up on AutoLab as optional assignments, and very, very few students would actually do them. So, but if there's enough demand and it'll be worth my effort to prep them again and get them out there, let me know and I'm not opposed to that. But it would be in Scala. But some of those I want to revive again, translate them into Java and get them in the course. But I'll release the Scala versions. Bless you. Anything else? This isn't where I saw this lecture going, but this is one of the lectures where I'm fine with it being open-ended. Anything else? With the course, like 2. I looked at that the other day. I'm like, I wonder how many people, I released everything a while ago, how many people are done with task 8. I think it was 2, and number of students done with the application objective task, 0, as of like 2 days ago. Yeah.
By the end of the semester, can you give us more projects relating to what you've learned in 116, so that, like, how all the tasks end up being a big project? Some resource or something like that?
Like give you more projects like that?
Just not in curriculum, but we can explore and do them.
I don't have anything like super ready to do, but that might be something you want to reach out with an email, and so I know exactly what you're asking. It takes a while especially making autograders takes forever, so I'm not going to do that on a whim. But if you want like project ideas, like here's something that you could build with the skills that you have now, that I would probably do. Yeah.
Is there any advantage to doing any other task if you have done everything and it's perfect?
Is there any what to it? Advantage to practice, get better. The more work you do, if you do optional programming outside of class, it's going to make 220, 250 and the rest of your career easier. You're just going to be that much better. That's one thing. If I were to ramp up the class at all, probably just have you do more stuff. Not necessarily harder stuff, not testing different topics or anything, but just more stuff. Just repetition. Yeah.
So I'm assuming so, but for the application of the objective, just a task currently, or just a slide currently in your CSE 116 at the application.
These are all the slides I'm gonna show on the state pattern. Oh, that is pretty light actually. I don't go into code examples. And then these 2 days I go into code examples. I would say the slides and the code for that week, going through the coding examples would probably be best.
And with state pattern, that's no conditions, right?
No conditionals. Yeah, that's probably why nobody's done that one yet. One student submitted but didn't get credit yet. Last time I checked. I guess that's a tough one to do without lecture content. Graphs you could do right now if you find that one's hard to do without lecture content. Actually, no, the slides I think outline it pretty well. But especially if you find the videos from last semester, you could do graphs right now.
So for graphs, how should we go into it?
How should you go into it?
Just watch the lecture videos?
I mean, it's soon enough that I would just wait till next week and I'll talk about it in lecture at this point. But you can, I mean, if you go to the YouTube channel, just scroll down until you find them. Actually, I think Jackie made a playlist for old semesters, a playlist to reach old semester recently.
We gotta get the graph from GitHub though, right?
The graph get
Because we don't.
graphs is
Included, we gotta get the graph from your GitHub document.
no, it's the same project you've been working on. Works on movies. The movie data that you loaded works on that same data. Yep.
I was going to ask, you said that some students aren't really prepared for 220 or 250. So what do you think are some areas that we should at least be exposed to before going into the
So I feel like we got the question for anyone who didn't hear. 220, 250, like what do I think you should do to be ready? What do I think a student should have to get ready? This one's, I have a dilemma with this one because it's the learning objectives in 116. Like functional programming, concurrency, those topics weren't really needed by 220, 250. That's why those were the ones that got cut. But what's left is needed for those classes. So your OOP, 250 is going to use that. 250 is going to be in Java. It's going to expand on data structure. So knowing the structure of a linked list, the structure of a tree, how a graph is represented, adjacency lists and matrices, and how to work with graphs, which overlaps with your 191 content too. So having that background knowledge going into 250 is going to be important. They'll just use OOP. They'll just expect you to know those things. So knowing OOP. And then for 220, anything with a memory diagram is going to be critical in 220. Those of you who still, which I'm a little surprised, well, I think the assessment's working because the students in this situation are failing the quizzes. But those of you who are still struggling to understand references in the stack versus heap, that stack has a reference to an object on the heap, which might have an instance variable with a reference to another object on the heap. You need to understand that before 220 starts. Because 220, it's going to be in C. And C not only has references, but it has references and pointers. And actually, what I call references in Java work more like pointers in C. So you have to, in addition, understand what references are, which maybe I should start renaming things and not use the word references in 116. But you have two different flavors of references on the stack and heap. And you can have in C a reference on a variable on the stack that has a reference to another variable on the stack. Like you can have things like that. So they'll take that to the next level. So if you're struggling to understand how that memory stuff works now, you're going to have a bad time in 220. And that's part of why we do so much memory diagram stuff. That's the biggest, especially for 220, it's the biggest takeaway of this course of just understanding how a computer works in general. That knowledge, that understanding will take you pretty far into the curriculum, into your career even. And then testing, of course, is the other side of this course. Testing, 220 and 250 have now started requiring some testing. They won't require as much as I do, but they will require some because nobody was testing and everyone was failing. So, but after 220, 250, I'm not aware of another course that will require testing. So understanding how to test your own code, if you don't have that skill, at the very least, by the time you get out of 220 and 250 and you're not forced to do it anymore, again, you're going to have a bad time. Running the debugger, learn how to use that debugger and love it. And a lot of courses will be a lot easier. You'll hear horror stories. You can ask the TAs even. They'll share some of their stories of upper-level CSE classes being next to impossible and you get no sleep and you have no free time. I think if you test and use the debugger, I don't think that will be the case. I think you'll be able to get through those courses without spending lots of time. A lot of times students will spend hours and hours and hours on a bug because they're just bashing against it, taking random guesses and hitting the go button and just hoping that the error goes away. I see this in CSE 312 all the time. Students will just hit random stuff and hope the error just goes away instead of actually going through a good testing and debug cycle to be able to eradicate the bug. So really everything in 116. If there was something that I thought didn't prep you for future classes and your future career, I'd cut it from the class. The one thing that's just about on the chopping block would be the state pattern. And my compromise there was, well, I'll make an application objective only so I still get to teach the state pattern because I like the state pattern. And I think it's beneficial. It's a nice application of OOP. But nowhere after 116 is anyone going to be like, you don't know the state pattern? What the hell is wrong with you? You need to know the state pattern. Like, you're not going to be held accountable for that knowledge. But it will, going through that objective, will solidify your understanding of inheritance and polymorphism. So I like it as an application still. All right, we should do some coding still. 250 will worry about runtime, yes. 250 is like, I don't know, I want to say half the course is about runtime analysis. And that's one of the big things we don't talk about much in 116 that's coming up. It's on the horizon in 250 in a very big way. We touch on it a little bit, but 250 being all about data structures, the question you should have going into 250 is, why don't I use an array list for absolutely everything ever? Which isn't the worst idea, to be honest. But when you have lots of data, and if you have like 10 elements, who cares? Use an array list for everything. But once you have hundreds of thousands to millions of elements in your data structure, you have to start thinking about what data structure is going to be the most runtime efficient. Which one's going to be so slow that my program is unusable, and which one is going to be fast enough that I don't even notice the delay in my data structure operations. So that's what you need to get out of 250 is what data structure do I use in what situation? And that's all about runtime analysis. Yeah.
So I just got an answer from Alan, and he said that 220 to 50 are prerequisites for 302.
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't know
he also
that.
said that this class will satisfy an in-depth requirement of experiential learning.
Oh yeah, I forgot we added experiential learning as a category. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Could you practice for 250 just by grinding LeetCode? I haven't really grinded LeetCode before. I think so, though. I think LeetCode has a lot of data structures questions. There are worse ways to prepare. I'll say that, like partying and playing video games wouldn't really prepare you. If you're doing LeetCode instead of that, you're going to have an edge. Yeah.
Can we do LeetCode like start with LeetCode from the stuff that we learned in 160?
Like I said, I haven't really done LeetCode. I think I did like one question the TAs sent to me. Then they were mad at me because I solved it faster than they did. but yeah, I just don't know exactly what the flavor of questions are. But give it a try. It's only one way to find out. Just try it. With what you know right now and Google, you can do any LeetCode question. I'll say that, even without knowing what the questions are. If you're like, wait, what is this they're asking for? Just Google it, learn some things, study, and then get to it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask it because I have no idea. What is leak code?
I don't know. It's like it gives you a programming question. They'll say, write a method, name this, that does this, returns this, etc. And then you write the code. It has an autograder. You submit, and it says either good job or try again.
So it's UB infinite.
It's basically UB infinite, yeah.
But it also, like, now that it has, like, available, you can read the code from other people and see if they did it.
Yeah, and I think it has runtime analysis too. Like it'll say you got it correct in 0.3 seconds or something, right? Okay. All right, let's do at least some of this stuff. What are some higher CSE classes that have specific languages as well, and are they structured like 115 and 116? Do upper level classes with specific language requirements? I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know off the top of my head. And they might change by the time you take those classes. The theory is, by the time you're done with 250 and 220, the theory I've subscribed to as well, by the way, after 220, 250, you should be able to pick up a new language. Like if you have a class, you take a class in a language you haven't seen before, you're expected to just pick it up. Like we're not going to do an intro week. Like the first 2 weeks of 116 is intro to Java. The first like week or two of 220 is going to be intro to C. You're not going to have that anymore in the upper level classes. But one, you're going to be exposed to quite a few languages. You got Python, Java, and C. That's a pretty good spread of languages. Those languages give you a lot of experience to a lot of different syntax. A lot of other languages are going to be very similar to one of those three. And if you get one that you haven't seen before, you should just be able to roll into it, read up some documentation, and get into it pretty quick. That's the idea. I don't have time for that question. What 300 and 400 level electives would be best? All of them. But especially CC 312. It's the one I teach, so I have to be biased. All right, so let's revisit some of this code. I'll keep an eye on questions, but I want to at least get the key points done, the key core things that I want. Last time we went off the rails, but we went off the rails with coding examples instead of meta stuff. But let's do the core things that I want to make sure I talk about. Is this comparator class? We had this comparator class with a compare method that returns false, and this never made sense, and I never liked this, but it's what we had to do because we didn't know about interfaces or abstract classes. We know about these things now. So let's fix this comparator method. Compare really shouldn't have any default behavior. Having it have a default behavior is very dangerous, and bless you. And there were some students who even get in into frustrating situations, I'll say, because of this. Again, did I change that to interface? No, I didn't. I have an import. I don't want an import. Oh, that's really annoying when I cut and paste the code and IntelliJ edit all that stuff. And students would get in trouble. They would do something like this. Instead of integer, they'd do int. They wouldn't take my recommendation, have their override annotation here. And they'd have this code. No errors, everything compiles, everything runs. But what happens when we go to sort our integers? Are they sorted in decreasing order? No, they're not. The comparator, instead of returning a greater than b, it returns false every single time. This is not what we want a comparator to do, but when we give this default implementation of the compare method, it's possible to get in a situation like this where you think you're overriding a method, but you didn't actually override it because int is in fact different than integer. So what we have in this class are two compare methods, one that takes two ints and one that takes two integers, which are very, very different things. This is an overloaded method, a method that even with the same name, same return type, if it has different parameter lists, including we have parameter lists of the same size, but different types, that's two different methods. That's an overloaded method. So when we call this comparator the way we expect in insertion sort, we're going to get the compare method that takes two integers and returns false. Not what we want. One of our solutions, well, one solution is just do your override annotations. Like, what are you saving by not putting those in there? But the other solution is if this is abstract, we're going to make this method abstract. This is a situation where we want everything that extends this class to have this method, but we don't have any obvious default behavior that this method should have, certainly not return false. So we're going to make it abstract, which means our class needs to be abstract. And then we're in a situation where our comments lie. Code never lies. Comments sometimes do. So let's get rid of our comment here that lies to us. And now we're getting an error here. Unimplemented method. We need a method that compares to integers, the type parameter t. We specified that it's integer. We don't have that method. And then the compiler is going to yell at us, and we can say, oh, yeah, I did int instead of integer. And in this situation, that actually does matter. It does need to be integer, not int. Or else we're not overriding the method from the interface. And when we're coding to the interface in insertion sort, we're not going to get that behavior that we expect because we're calling the wrong compare method. So we can get in a situation like that. And we can take this one step further. Comparator doesn't need to be an abstract class. It has one thing in it, and it's an abstract method. That's a key candidate for an interface. So I'm going to change this to an interface because it only has abstract methods. Bless you. And I've said a lot of times an interface can only have abstract methods. I'll say it again today. An interface can only have abstract methods. It's the only thing it can have. I'm going to bend that a little bit. That's a little bit of a lie, but not much of a lie. And those abstract methods have to be public abstract. So when I have public abstract here, IntelliJ is giving me a heads up like, hey, you know you don't have to do that. It's an interface. It has to be public and abstract because that's all you can have. Your abstract methods and your interfaces have to be public. So why do you even have these words here? You should know by now I like to be explicit in my code whenever I can. This is one spot where I don't want to be explicit. Like, it's an interface. They're public and abstract. I'm just going to put this in my code. I'm not going to bother with public abstract because it has to be public abstract. The one thing we can bend, the interface can only have public abstract methods, but if I do something like this, that compiles. We can't have instance variables in interfaces, so what the hell? Like, what's going on here? This looks like an instance variable, but I promise you it is not an instance variable. It looks exactly like an instance variable, though. This is just like our method when we had public abstract, and IntelliJ was like, you don't need those words. It has to be public abstract. Same thing is going on here. This method, this variable has to be public. So that's going to be grayed out and says, you don't need that. It's got to be public. It's an interface. Static, the key one that we're interested here, it has to be a static variable. So that was actually a static variable, not an instance variable. And it has to be final. So we get a public static constant if we create a variable in an interface, but it looks like it's just a regular instance variable. It most definitely is not an instance variable. The static is optional because it has to be, final is optional, it has to be, public is optional, it has to be. So if we want to create static variables or static methods, I can put a main method here. It has to be static if we have an implementation to a method in an interface. It has to be static. So we can have static methods, we can have static variables, but any non-static anything in an abstract or in an interface has to be an abstract method. Yep.
So I was just asking a question. You said that public static song, array of songs, that was an instance variable?
Static. In code that I showed? Where was it?
In my
Oh, I don't remember exactly. Oh, and when we can talk about that offline. That's not something that pertains to everybody. We can talk after class, though. I forget the exact details off the top of my head.
I just wonder, is that static? That's not instance, right? Because it's a static instance.
I will talk after. I don't remember the exact things. But so we can have static variables and static methods in our interface. And that was fun. Jesse should have a Q&A where we pick his brain about CS life. The last 3 lectures of the semester, those ones go up for a vote. I'll create a Piazza post. Y'all can vote what you want. If that's what you want, I'd be happy doing that. That's fun. And just do Q&A like that. 15 minutes of coding, start speed running. Do you recommend trying to take them together, 220 and 250 together or apart? This one, I get this question a lot. I don't have a concrete answer. The short answer is you know what you're capable of. If you're crushing 116, you can take both of them at the same time. You'll be able to make it through. You'll survive it at the very least. But if you're struggling with 116, you might want to try to tease them apart. I know in the flow sheet, we put them on the same semester if you're a CS major as opposed to CEN. And that is tough, but you know what you're made of, you know what you're capable of. If you think you can handle basically 2 courses at the same time that are both more demanding than 116, that's what you're in for if you're taking them both at the same time. If you think you can handle that and you're not afraid of that, take them both at the same time. If you don't think you can handle that, I don't know, take them both at the same time anyway. We just went over the resignation deadline. Just make sure you're taking enough credits that you're not going below full time if you resign one of them. Is honestly what I would do. That's why I resigned classes. I would just overload all my classes. And then once we got a few weeks into the semester, I would decide which ones were the biggest pains in the ass and then resign those ones. Don't tell me when I recommended that, but that's what I did. Though I always did have the intention of taking and finishing them all, it just usually didn't happen. Some of them were just way too much. What? Oh my goodness. IntelliJ's killing me with this. Why? I've been thinking the same thing. Whenever students show me code this semester, everything's been looking really different. I think in right before the semester, maybe over the break, IntelliJ must have updated their whole UI because I'm seeing a different UI from every student this semester. So I think I just have to update mine and get used to the new UI. Which is annoying because when y'all have questions, I have to look around for all the buttons again.
I think it might be because maybe you have some plugins that we do, and themes are different, of course, but along with that, I see some plugins that we probably don't have.
It might be. I didn't install any visual plugins though. I just used the vanilla. I don't know. I'll figure it out someday. But things like that mid-semester, I don't want to mess with. I don't like updating anything mid-semester. Is part of that. All right. So same thing with game item. We saw this in the slides. We changed this to an abstract class, and we did something different in lecture. This is lecture. Did something different in the slides than what I'm about to do here, but we'll do things a little different just to show you a different thing. We have this interface usable. This interface is going to be the same, so let me just crank this one out. We have void use, which took a player. Abstract method. It's an interface. It has to have abstract methods. And then instead of implementing that interface in my health potion and weapon class, which we did because I wanted to see extends, game item, implements, usable. I wanted extends and implements in the same line just to show you how that works. Instead, I'm going to implement it in the game item class. Implements, usable. So I have an abstract class that's implementing an interface. What this means is my abstract class is going to get one more abstract method from the usable interface, and then anything that extends game item is responsible for implementing all of the game items, or all of the abstract methods, which this one I can get rid of. That's an abstract method now. And use, I would make abstract. Oh, I have to use the word abstract. That's about all we'll be able to do. The music's about to come over. It's hard to do a crossover episode when I'm not co-teaching with Paul, though. Next semester, when I'm co-teaching with Paul, we'll do crossover stuff again.